The cold metal chair bit into Veltar's spine as the energy shackles hummed around his wrists. 6 months had passed since his capture, and the proud Thrakari warrior no longer carried himself with the same confidence that once made enemy fleets tremble. His golden scales had dulled to a sickly yellow, and his 4 eyes darted nervously around the sterile white chamber. Above him, 3 members of the High Command sat behind a curved table that seemed to float in the air. Their robes shimmered, with rank insignias that told of countless victories across dozens of star systems. General Krixta leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat until the humans appeared. "Warrior Veltar," she began, each word sharp as a blade. "You commanded our finest battle fleet. You studied warfare at the Imperial Academy for 20 cycles. You led successful campaigns against the Rigid Ones and the Gas Dwellers. Yet somehow, a species that barely learned to fly between stars managed to destroy 3 of our greatest armadas." Veltar's throat made a clicking sound, the Thrakari equivalent of a nervous cough. He had been dreading this moment since his capture. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he make them understand that everything they knew about warfare had become useless against these strange creatures called humans? "Honored generals," Veltar began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans are not like any enemy we have faced. They do not follow the proper rules of engagement. They do not surrender when defeated. They do not value their own lives the way civilized beings should." General Thokvar, the eldest of the 3, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "Nonsense! Every species follows the basic laws of survival. Every creature seeks to preserve itself first. This is the foundation of all military strategy." "That is what I believe too," Veltar replied, his voice growing stronger. "When we first detected their radio signals 50 cycles ago, our scouts reported a divided world. They fought constantly among themselves. We thought they would be easy to conquer, perhaps even grateful for the order we would bring to their chaos." He paused, remembering those early intelligence reports. The humans had seemed so primitive, so scattered. Their technology was crude compared to Thrakari energy weapons and shield systems. Their ships moved slowly through space using chemical rockets. Everything suggested an easy victory. "Tell us about first contact," General Mivra commanded. She was younger than the others, but her reputation for tactical analysis had earned her a place on the tribunal. "Your initial report mentioned unexpected resistance at their outer colony." Veltar closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back. The human settlement on a small world they called New Haven had looked defenseless from orbit. A few thousand colonists, basic mining equipment, no visible weapons. Standard protocol called for a demonstration of superior firepower, followed by demands for surrender. "We approached their colony with a single destroyer," Veltar continued. "I wanted to show them our power without causing unnecessary destruction. The humans sent a small delegation to meet us on the planet's surface." The Thrakari warrior remembered that day clearly. The human representatives had seemed so small and fragile compared to his soldiers. They wore simple clothing and spoke in calm voices. Their leader, an older female with gray hair, had listened politely to the demands for submission. "What was their response?" General Krixta asked. They said no. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Not, "We need time to consider," or "What are your terms?" Just a simple, direct no. Then they walked away. The 3 generals exchanged glances. Such defiance from a weaker species was unprecedented in their experience. Most civilizations at least attempted to negotiate when faced with superior force. "We waited 3 days for them to reconsider," Veltar went on. "During that time, our sensors showed normal activity in their settlement. People going about their daily routines, children playing in the streets. It seemed they were either too primitive to understand the threat or too foolish to care." General Thokvar leaned forward, his interest clearly growing. "What happened when you moved to enforce your demands?" Veltar's voice became barely audible. We discovered that the humans had spent those 3 days preparing for war. Not preparing to surrender. Not preparing to negotiate. Preparing to fight. A battle they could not possibly win. The memory of what followed still gave him nightmares. When the Thrakari forces moved to occupy the colony, they found that every building had been turned into a fortress. The humans had dug tunnels connecting their structures, creating a network of hidden passages. They had rigged explosives throughout their own settlement. They fought us for every meter of ground, Veltar whispered. Old males, young females, even adolescents joined the battle. They used farming equipment as weapons. They turned their own homes into traps. They seemed to prefer death to submission. General Mivra made notes on her datapad. Surely such resistance could not last long against professional soldiers with superior weapons. It lasted 6 days, Veltar replied. 6 days of constant fighting. We lost more warriors in that small engagement than in our previous 5 campaigns combined. And when we finally controlled the settlement, we found that most of the humans had escaped through tunnels we never detected. The generals sat in silence, processing this information. Such determined resistance from civilians was unthinkable in their orderly society. Thrakari citizens trusted their military to protect them and accepted authority when overwhelmed by superior force. But this was just one small colony, General Krixta pointed out. Surely their main worlds would be more reasonable. Veltar laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That is what we thought too. We believed New Haven was an exception, perhaps a settlement of particularly stubborn individuals. So we prepared for the real invasion, confident that facing their home fleets would be different. He looked up at his interrogators, and they saw something in his eyes that disturbed them deeply. It was not just fear or defeat. It was the look of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had been shattered. Honored generals, Veltar said slowly. Everything I am about to tell you will sound impossible. You will think I am lying, or that my mind has been damaged by captivity. But I swear by the light of the home star that every word is true. The chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of the recording devices. The 3 generals waited, though each secretly wondered if their greatest warrior had indeed lost his sanity during his time among the humans. The real war, Veltar concluded, began when we learned that humans do not just fight to win. They fight to teach their enemies that fighting humans is a mistake no one should make twice. Veltar's claws scraped against the metal table as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to an almost whisper. The 3 generals watched him carefully, noting how his 4 eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the walls of the interrogation chamber. The second wave of our invasion was meant to be decisive, he began. High Command had learned from the New Haven incident. No more small demonstrations of power. We would strike at the heart of their solar system with overwhelming force. Nay. Krixta consulted her datapad. The records show you commanded a fleet of 60 heavy cruisers and supporting vessels. More firepower than most species see in their entire existence. Yes, Veltar nodded slowly. We were confident. Our target was the area near their gas giant Jupiter, where intelligence reports showed several mining stations and supply depots. The plan was simple. Destroy their infrastructure, force them to negotiate. The Thrakari warrior paused, his breathing becoming labored as the memories surfaced. What we found when we arrived changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. The human solar system had seemed quiet when the Thrakari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Their sensors detected the expected mining platforms around Jupiter's moons, along with what appeared to be a small defensive fleet. Perhaps 20 human vessels, outdated designs that posed no real threat to a force of their magnitude. Their commander sent us a message, Veltar continued. Admiral Torres, a female with silver hair and eyes like frozen water. She spoke our language perfectly, which surprised us. Most species we encounter barely manage basic trade tongue. He remembered how calm Torres had seemed on the communication screen. No rage, no fear, no desperate attempts at bargaining. She had simply stated that the humans would defend their territory and suggested the Thrakari reconsider their invasion. "We gave them 6 hours to evacuate their civilians and surrender their military assets," Veltar said. "Standard protocol. Torres thanked us for our courtesy and said she would use the time wisely." General Thakvar frowned. "She thanked you? That seems an odd response to an ultimatum. I thought so too at the time. But humans have a different relationship with courtesy than we do. They often say things they do not mean, especially when planning to do the opposite of what they suggest." The 6 hours had passed peacefully. Thrakari sensors showed normal activity on the mining stations. Some ships moved between facilities, apparently evacuating non-essential personnel as requested. The human defensive fleet maintained its position, but showed no signs of aggressive intent. When the deadline expired, we moved forward, Veltar recalled. Our formation was perfect. Heavy cruisers in the lead, destroyers covering the flanks, support vessels protected in the center. Every ship knew its role. Every warrior was prepared for glory. The initial assault had gone exactly as planned. Thrakari energy weapons swept across the human mining platforms, reducing them to glowing debris in minutes. The human ships scattered before the advancing fleet, their inferior engines no match for Thrakari speed. It felt like hunting young prey, Veltar admitted. The humans seemed to panic. Their ships broke formation, running in all directions. Some tried to hide behind asteroids. Others attempted desperate attacks that our shields easily absorbed. General Mivra looked up from her notes. But something was wrong with this picture. Everything was wrong, Veltar replied, his voice growing harsh. But we were too focused on our easy victory to notice the trap closing around us. The Thrakari advance had pushed deep into the asteroid field surrounding Jupiter. Human ships continued to flee before them, occasionally turning to fire ineffective weapons before resuming their retreat. The mining stations burned behind them, filling space with debris and radiation that interfered with long-range sensors. Admiral Torres contacted us again, Veltar continued. This time she was not calm. She seemed desperate, offering to surrender if we would spare the civilian evacuation ships. She gave us coordinates where her remaining military vessels were gathering for a final stand. The coordinates had led the Thrakari fleet to a large asteroid where several human ships floated dead in space. Their engines were cold, their weapons powered down. Debris around them suggested they had been damaged in the earlier fighting. It looked like the perfect end to our campaign, Veltar said. A few dozen crippled human ships waiting to be destroyed. We moved in to finish them off. General Krixta sensed where this story was heading. The ships were not actually disabled. Worse than that, Veltar replied. The ships were not actually ships. The memory still made his scales itch with phantom pain. The Thrakari fleet had closed to point-blank range before anyone realized the truth. The human vessels were hollow shells packed with fusion explosives, remote-controlled bombs disguised as damaged warships. The explosion destroyed 12 of our heavy cruisers instantly, Veltar said, his voice flat with remembered horror. The blast was so powerful it created an artificial star for several seconds. Ships that survived the initial detonation were caught in a chain reaction as debris struck their hulls. But the explosion had been only the beginning of the trap. As Thrakari vessels reeled from the blast, real human ships emerged from hiding places throughout the asteroid field. They had been waiting, engines cold and weapons powered down, invisible to sensors focused on the decoy fleet. They attacked from all directions at once, Veltar continued. Not like civilized warriors engaging in honorable combat, but like predators falling on wounded prey. They concentrated fire on damaged ships, finishing off vessels that might have been repaired. The battle had lasted only minutes, but those minutes had shattered the myth of Thrakari invincibility. Human ships used the asteroid field like terrain, ducking behind rocks to avoid return fire, popping out to launch attacks from unexpected angles. What disturbed me most was not their tactics, Veltar said quietly. It was their willingness to sacrifice their own people to make the deception work. The generals looked confused, so he explained. The mining stations they had destroyed so easily had not been evacuated. Thousands of human civilians had died in the initial bombardment, their deaths serving no purpose except to make the Thrakari believe they were winning. They used their own people as bait, Veltar said, his voice filled with disbelief even now. Men, women, children died to convince us that we were facing a normal enemy. Their deaths made us careless. General Thokvar struggled to comprehend such thinking. No civilized species would sacrifice civilians for tactical advantage. The cost in lives would be unacceptable. That is what I told myself, Veltar replied. But later I learned something that chilled my blood. The humans who died in those mining stations knew they were being used as bait. Torres had told them the plan. They chose to stay. The silence in the interrogation chamber stretched for long. Moments as the three generals tried to process this information. A species that would deliberately sacrifice thousands of its own people to win a single battle was beyond their understanding. The survivors of my fleet limped home with 30% casualties, Veltar concluded. But the real damage was not to our ships. It was to our confidence. We had always believed that warfare followed certain rules, certain logical patterns. The humans showed us that we were wrong. General Mivra cleared her throat. Surely this was an extreme case. No species could maintain such ruthless calculations consistently. Veltar looked at her with something approaching pity. Honored General, what I have told you so far is just the beginning. The battle at Jupiter taught the humans that deception could defeat superior force. What they did with that lesson will haunt your dreams as it has haunted mine. The interrogation chamber's lights dimmed slightly as Veltar began speaking again, his voice carrying a tremor that had not been there before. The three generals noticed how his clawed hands shook when he reached for the water container, and how he avoided looking directly at them while he spoke. After the disaster at Jupiter, High Command decided that space battles favored human deception too much, he said. The new strategy was to occupy their worlds directly, to fight them on the ground where our superior training and equipment would matter more than their cunning tricks. General Kriksta nodded approvingly. Ground combat is more predictable, harder to hide large forces or create elaborate deceptions. That is what we thought, Veltar replied with a bitter laugh. We were wrong about that too. The target had been Mars, humanity's first major colony world. Intelligence reports showed it held about 5 million humans living in dome cities, scattered across the red planet's surface. The largest settlement, called New Shanghai, housed nearly 500,000 people in a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings. We landed 50,000 warriors, Veltar continued. Elite troops with the finest weapons and armor. We expected to control the planet within days. The initial assault had gone smoothly. Thrakari dropships delivered forces to strategic points around New Shanghai, while orbital bombardment eliminated the human defense batteries. The city's shields failed within hours, leaving the population defenseless against the invading army. The outer districts fell quickly, Veltar remembered. Human police and militia units retreated rather than face us directly. We thought they were showing proper wisdom, recognizing their inferior position. But as the Thrakari forces pushed deeper into the city, the nature of the resistance changed. Instead of organized military units, they found themselves fighting scattered groups of humans who seemed to follow no recognizable tactical doctrine. They hid in buildings we had already cleared, Veltar said, his voice growing quieter. They attacked from sewers and ventilation systems. They used their own civilian infrastructure as a weapon against us. The breakthrough had come on the fourth day, when Thrakari forces finally cornered a group of human defenders in a residential building. The battle should have been simple. 15 Thrakari warriors with energy weapons and powered armor against perhaps 6 humans with primitive projectile weapons. I led that assault myself, Veltar said, touching a scar that ran across his left cheek. I wanted to show my soldiers how to properly deal with these pests. The humans had barricaded themselves on the building's top floor. Standard Thrakari. Doctrine called for a methodical advance up the stairwells, using superior firepower to overwhelm any resistance. The attack began precisely at dawn. We breached their defenses easily, Veltar continued. Their weapons barely scratched our armor. Within minutes, most of them were down. Only one remained standing, a young male who had been hit multiple times. The human soldier's name had been Reed, though Veltar only learned this later. He was perhaps 25 years old by human standards, with brown hair and green eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. 3 energy weapon hits had torn through his left arm and chest, wounds that should have killed him instantly. Any sensible being would have surrendered or at least collapsed from blood loss, Veltar said. This human did neither. Instead, Reed had done something that still gave the Thrakari commander nightmares. Using his severed arm as a club, the human had charged directly at the advancing soldiers. His blood sprayed across their helmet visors, temporarily blinding them in the crucial seconds before he detonated a grenade he had been carrying. 6 of my best warriors died in that explosion, Veltar said quietly. But what disturbed me more was the look in the human's eyes. He was not afraid. He was not angry. He looked satisfied, as if dying while killing us was exactly what he had hoped to achieve. General Thakvar shook his head in confusion. Surely this was an isolated incident. Combat stress can make any being act irrationally. That is what I told myself, Veltar replied, until it happened again, and again, and again. The pattern had repeated throughout the siege of New Shanghai. Human defenders who should have surrendered instead chose death, but not simple death. They died in ways designed to cause maximum damage to their enemies. They turned themselves into weapons, Veltar said, his voice barely above a whisper. A human with a damaged power pack would detonate it when we came close. A human with internal injuries would pretend to be dead, then attack when we moved past. They seemed to view their own bodies as tools to be used and discarded. The psychological effect on the Thrakari forces had been devastating. Soldiers trained to expect rational behavior from their enemies found themselves facing opponents who followed no logical pattern. Every advance became a potential trap. Every victory, a possible ambush. We started wearing full environmental suits instead of standard armor, Veltar continued. Not because of weapons, but because the humans had started using their own blood as a weapon. They would cut themselves deliberately, spraying blood on our vision systems or weapon ports. One incident in particular still haunted his dreams. A human female, badly wounded and surrounded by Thrakari soldiers, had somehow managed to bite through her own tongue. Instead of dying quickly, she had used her blood to blind 3 warriors before strangling the 4th with her bare hands. She was 60 years old, Veltar said, his voice filled with disbelief. A grandmother according to the identification we found later. She fought like a creature possessed by demons. General Mivra looked up from her notes, her expression troubled. These sound like the actions of individuals driven mad by desperation. Surely their military commanders would have tried to maintain order. Veltar's laugh was harsh and bitter. Their commanders were the worst of all. They encouraged this behavior. They taught their soldiers that dying while killing enemies was not just acceptable, but glorious. The siege of New Shanghai had dragged on for 3 weeks before the humans finally ran out of ammunition and supplies. But even surrender had brought no relief for the Thrakari forces. The humans had booby-trapped their own city so extensively that simply occupying it became a daily nightmare of hidden explosives and toxic traps. We lost more warriors to their traps than to their weapons, Veltar said. They poisoned their own water supplies rather than let us use them. They rigged their power systems to explode if activated incorrectly. They turned their entire city into a death trap. The final horror had come when Thrakari engineers tried to repair the city's life support systems. Hidden beneath the primary control center, they found a massive bomb that the humans had apparently been preparing to detonate rather than allow the city to fall. It would have killed everyone, Veltar said quietly. Every human civilian, every Thrakari warrior, everyone in the city. They were willing to destroy 500,000 of their own people just to take 50,000 of us with them. The three generals sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend such thinking. The idea of a species that would choose mutual annihilation over defeat challenged everything they knew about survival instincts. The bomb was disconnected when we found it, General Kriksta finally said. They chose not to use it. Only because their military commander was killed before he could give the order, Veltar replied. We found his final message in the system. Records. He was apologizing to his people for failing to complete the destruction. The memory of reading that message still made Veltar's scales crawl. The human commander had not been apologizing for the deaths of his own people. He had been apologizing for failing to kill enough of the enemy. Honored generals, Veltar concluded, I have fought many species across the galaxy. I have seen courage and cowardice, honor and cruelty. But I have never encountered a people who treat death as just another weapon to be used against their enemies. The humans do not just fight to win. They fight to make sure that defeating them costs more than victory is worth. Veltar's entire body seemed to shrink as he prepared to speak again. The three generals noticed how his breathing became shallow and rapid, as if the memories he was about to share required all his strength to voice. When he finally looked up at them, his four eyes held a haunted expression that made even the battle-hardened commanders uncomfortable. What I am about to tell you, he began slowly, is the reason I can no longer sleep without sedatives. It is why I requested this interrogation rather than waiting for execution. Someone must know the truth about what humans are capable of, even if that someone is our enemy. The setting for this account was Luna, Earth's moon, during the final phase of the war. The Thrakari High Command had decided that conquering humanity's home system required controlling the lunar colonies first. These settlements served as staging areas for Earth's defenses and contained critical manufacturing facilities. Luna had a population of 2 million humans, Veltar said. We expected heavy resistance from their military forces, but intelligence suggested the majority were civilians involved in mining and research. We planned a careful evacuation followed by occupation. General Thokvar leaned forward. A civilized approach. Minimize civilian casualties while achieving strategic objectives. Yes. Veltar nodded. We even broadcast our intentions in advance, giving the humans 72 hours to evacuate non-essential personnel. We monitored their communications and confirmed that evacuation ships were leaving the lunar surface regularly. The Thrakari fleet had waited patiently as human transport vessels carried load after load of civilians away from the moon. Sensor readings confirmed that the population was declining steadily. By the time the deadline expired, only about 300,000 humans remained, presumably military personnel and essential workers. We began our landing operations with minimal force, Veltar continued. Just enough troops to secure key facilities and accept the inevitable surrender. We expected the remaining humans to be reasonable once they saw the futility of resistance. The initial landings had encountered scattered opposition, nothing more than the expected token resistance from a few die-hard soldiers. Thrakari forces quickly secured the main spaceports and communication centers. The human military commander, a colonel named Brett, had even opened negotiations for a formal surrender. Everything proceeded according to standard protocols, Veltar said, until the supply convoys started disappearing. The first incident had seemed like bad luck. A supply truck carrying ammunition to a forward base had simply vanished somewhere along the route. When search teams found the wreckage, it appeared the humans had used a small explosive device to destroy the vehicle. We assumed it was the work of a few soldiers who had refused to accept their commander's surrender, Veltar explained. Such incidents are common during occupation duties. We increased security and continued operations. But the attacks had continued, growing bolder and more sophisticated. Fuel depots exploded without warning. Communication lines were cut with surgical precision. Guard posts were attacked by invisible enemies who struck and disappeared like ghosts. Our intelligence specialists analyzed the attack patterns, Veltar said. The precision and timing suggested elite special forces operatives, probably trained in advanced infiltration techniques. The truth had been far worse than that. We captured our first saboteur on the 5th day of occupation, Veltar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The prisoner was 12 years old. General Mivra looked up sharply from her notes. A child? Surely you mean a young adult who appeared younger than expected? No, Veltar replied firmly. Medical scans confirmed her age. 12 years old by human standards, still missing several adult teeth, still carrying a stuffed animal in her backpack. The little girl's name had been Amy, and she had been caught placing explosive charges in a water treatment facility. When captured, she showed no fear of her alien captors. Instead, she had calmly explained that damaging the facility would force the Thrakari to bring in replacement equipment from their ships, creating opportunities for further sabotage. She spoke about tactical objectives the way most children discuss games, Veltar said, his voice filled with disturbed amazement. She knew exactly how much damage was needed to disable the facility without making it impossible to repair. She understood supply logistics better than some of our junior officers. The interrogation of Amy had revealed a horrifying truth. The civilian evacuation had been carefully staged. Adult humans had left the moon as planned, but they had deliberately left behind their children. Not abandoned them, but assigned them. Military missions. The humans call it their junior cadet program, Veltar explained. Children as young as 10 years old trained in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and intelligence gathering. They use their youth as camouflage, knowing that most civilized species would not perceive children as military threats. The program's effectiveness had been devastating. Thrakari soldiers programmed to protect young beings found themselves psychologically unable to treat human children as combatants. The few who tried often hesitated at crucial moments, giving the young saboteurs time to complete their missions or escape. A 13-year-old boy named Tim destroyed our main ammunition depot, Veltar continued. He walked through 3 security checkpoints by pretending to be lost and scared. The guards tried to help him find his parents. While they were distracted by his tears, he planted charges that eliminated 60% of our explosive ordnance. But the children's effectiveness went beyond simple sabotage. They had been trained to gather intelligence with the same dedication as adult spies. Their innocent appearance allowed them to observe Thrakari operations without suspicion. A group of 8 children, the oldest being 15, managed to steal complete tactical plans for our next offensive, Veltar said. They posed as refugees seeking food and shelter. Our logistics officers took pity on them, allowing them access to secure areas. Within 6 hours, the humans had detailed knowledge of our troop movements and supply routes. The psychological warfare aspect had been perhaps the most disturbing element. The children spoke about their missions with the same casual attitude they might discuss school assignments. They showed no signs of trauma or reluctance about potentially killing alien soldiers. I personally interrogated 17 of these junior operatives, Veltar said. Not one showed any fear of death. Not one expressed regret about their actions. They spoke of duty and honor with the same conviction as veteran warriors. General Krixta struggled to process this information. Surely their parents would have objected to such use of their offspring? The parents planned it, Veltar replied flatly. We intercepted communications showing that human families volunteered their children for the program. They considered it an honor to have their young ones serve in the war effort. The most chilling incident had involved a 9-year-old girl named Rose who had managed to poison the water supply for an entire Thrakari base. 60 soldiers had become violently ill, and 12 had died before medical teams identified the toxin. "When we caught her, she was crying," Veltar said. "Not from fear or guilt, but because she thought she had failed her mission. The poison was supposed to be fatal to all 60 soldiers. She apologized to her interrogators for not killing enough of us." The pattern had repeated across all the lunar colonies. Human children conducting military operations with the efficiency of trained soldiers and the ruthlessness of veteran killers. They rigged explosives, gathered intelligence, and eliminated targets with cold precision. The final evacuation ships that left Luna were not carrying human children to safety, Veltar concluded. They were carrying our wounded soldiers home for medical treatment that our facilities could not provide. The three generals sat in horrified silence, trying to comprehend a species that would deliberately turn their own young into weapons of war. The concept challenged every assumption they held about civilized behavior and parental instincts. "We abandoned the lunar occupation after 3 weeks," Veltar said quietly. "Not because of military defeat, but because our soldiers were suffering. Psychological breakdown. Warriors trained to conquer worlds could not cope with fighting children who showed no mercy and expected none in return." General Mivra finally found her voice. "What happened to the children after you withdrew?" Veltar's expression became even more haunted. "According to our final intelligence reports, they were promoted to senior positions in the Human Military Academy. Their successful missions became case studies for training the next generation of human soldiers." The interrogation chamber fell silent, except for the quiet hum of recording equipment. The three generals faced a terrifying realization. They were not just fighting a species with unusual tactics, but a civilization that had weaponized every aspect of its society, including its children. "Honored generals," Veltar said finally, "the humans have shown us something that should be impossible. They have proven that there is no line they will not cross, no sacrifice they will not make, no tactic they will not employ in service of victory. Their children fight with the dedication of fanatics and the skill of professionals. What does that tell you about the adults we still face?" The interrogation chamber fell into a heavy silence as Veltar finished his account of the lunar campaign. The three generals exchanged troubled glances, each lost in their own thoughts about the implications of what they had heard. Outside, the artificial day cycle of Viro 7 was ending, casting long shadows through the chamber's single window. Veltar sat quietly in his restraints, watching his interrogators process the information he had shared. 6 months of captivity had taught him to read Thrakari expressions almost as well as he once read enemy battle formations. He could see the doubt, the fear, and the growing realization that their species might have made a terrible mistake. "You speak as if the war is already lost," General Krixta said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "These are troubling accounts, but humans are still a single species on a handful of worlds. We command an empire spanning dozens of star systems." "That is what I thought too," Veltar replied with a weary smile, "until I began studying human history during my captivity. The human prison where he was held had an extensive digital library, a courtesy that had initially puzzled him. Most civilized species kept prisoners isolated from information that might aid escape attempts, but the humans had actively encouraged him to learn about their culture and history. "At first I thought it was psychological warfare," Veltar explained, "an attempt to break my spirit by showing me the size and power of their civilization. Instead, I discovered something far more disturbing. The human guards had been polite, but distant during his first weeks of captivity. They provided adequate food, medical care, and even entertainment options. But they had also left him with access to thousands of hours of human historical records, military documents, and cultural archives. I learned that everything we witnessed during our invasion was not unusual human behavior, Veltar continued. It was normal human behavior. They have been perfecting these tactics against each other for thousands of years. The revelation had begun with simple curiosity. Veltar had started reading human military history to understand their tactical thinking. What he found was a species that had turned warfare into an art form through constant practice against their own kind. In their ancient history, humans fought a war that lasted 100 years, Veltar said, his voice filled with amazement. 100 years of continuous conflict between groups of the same species. They created weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering. They developed strategies based on the deliberate starvation of entire populations. General Thokvar shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Surely these were primitive conflicts from their early development. Civilized species outgrow such brutality. These conflicts continued until very recently in their timeline, Veltar replied. Within the last century, humans fought 2 global wars that killed over 100 million of their own people. They created weapons capable of destroying entire cities in single attacks. They used these weapons against each other. The scope of human military innovation had staggered him. Chemical weapons designed to cause slow, agonizing death. Biological weapons that turned the human body against itself. Nuclear weapons that could sterilize entire continents. All developed and used against other humans. They call it the Great War in the Second World War, Veltar continued. But what disturbed me most was not the scale of destruction. It was how quickly they learned from each conflict. Every war taught them new ways to kill more efficiently. The pattern was consistent throughout human history. Each generation developed deadlier weapons and more effective tactics. They studied their own defeats obsessively, turning every loss into a lesson for future victory. They even created schools dedicated to teaching the art of warfare. They have academies where their brightest minds spend years studying nothing but conflict, Veltar explained. They analyze every battle ever fought, including the ones we had with them. They are learning from our tactics even as we speak. General Mivra looked up from her notes with a troubled expression. You suggest they are improving their military capabilities during peacetime? I suggest they never have peacetime, Veltar replied grimly. Even when humans are not actively fighting external enemies, they conduct massive military exercises. They simulate battles against imaginary opponents. They constantly prepare for wars that may never come. The dedication to military preparation had been unlike anything in Thrakari experience. Most civilized species maintained defensive forces, but focused primarily on trade, science, and cultural development. Humans seem to view military preparation as a fundamental aspect of their civilization. Their children play games that simulate warfare, Veltar continued. Their entertainment media glorifies military conflict. Their greatest heroes are warriors who died in battle. They have created a culture where fighting and dying for strategic advantage is considered the highest form of honor. But what truly chilled him was the realization that human military thinking was still evolving. The tactics they had used against the Thrakari were already being analyzed and improved. Human commanders were studying the battles, identifying weaknesses in their own performance, and developing better methods. I had the opportunity to speak with some of their military leaders during my captivity, Veltar said. They thanked me for the learning experience our invasion provided. They said fighting us had taught them valuable lessons about combating technologically superior enemies. The casual way humans discussed learning from defeat had been perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his captivity. They showed no shame about their losses, no regret about their casualties. Instead, they treated every setback as valuable intelligence. For future operations, Admiral Torres visited me last month, Veltar continued. The same human who destroyed my fleet at Jupiter. She wanted to discuss tactical theory with me. She was curious about Thrakari command structures and decision-making processes. The conversation had been cordial but deeply unsettling. Torres, had spoken about the space battle as if it were an academic exercise rather than a life-or-death struggle. She had even complimented some of the Thrakari tactical decisions while pointing out areas where they could have been more effective. She told me that fighting us had helped her understand the weaknesses in human defensive strategies, Veltar said. She was already developing new tactics based on what she learned from our attack patterns. This constant adaptation was what made humans so dangerous. Other species developed military doctrines and followed them for generations. Humans treated doctrine as a starting point, constantly modifying and improving their methods based on new experience. The war we fought was not a conflict between two military forces, Veltar said quietly. It was a training exercise for human, strategic thinking. Every battle taught them something new about fighting enemies with superior technology. General Kriksta leaned forward, her expression grave. What do you believe will happen if we attempt another invasion? Veltar was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. The humans we would face in a second war would not be the same humans we fought before. They have spent months analyzing our tactics, studying our equipment, and preparing countermeasures. They know our capabilities now. The three generals sat in uncomfortable silence, finally understanding the true scope of the threat they faced. It was not just that humans were difficult to defeat. It was that fighting them made them stronger. Honored generals, Veltar said finally, I have spent my entire adult life studying warfare. I understand strategy, tactics, and the psychology of combat. I know how to analyze enemy capabilities and predict their behavior. But humans are not an enemy that can be analyzed or predicted. He paused, gathering his thoughts for his final warning. They are a species that has turned conflict itself into their greatest weapon. Every battle makes them more dangerous. Every defeat teaches them new lessons. Every victory shows them new possibilities. They do not just fight to win wars. They fight to become better at fighting wars. The silence that followed was broken only by the quiet hum of the recording equipment. The three generals faced a choice that would determine the fate of their empire. They could recommend peace negotiations with an unpredictable enemy, or they could risk destruction in an escalating conflict against a species that grew stronger with every battle. What would you advise, Warrior Veltar? General Mivra asked quietly. Veltar looked directly at each of them in turn, his 4 eyes reflecting the weight of his experience. I would advise that we learn to coexist with humans because the alternative is teaching them how to destroy us completely. They are not a species we can defeat through military force. They are a species that military force makes more dangerous. The interrogation was over, but the real decision was just beginning. The Thrakari Empire would soon discover whether they were wise enough to choose peace with an enemy that viewed every conflict as an opportunity to become deadlier than before.